want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go down the line and just ask each witness a simple question, and maybe it could be answered with a yes or no, because I do have a follow-up question. Do you think that the transition from coal-fired power plants to natural gas is mostly a positive development or a negative development for our nation?
Well, Mr. Rush, I think we need a balance. We need a portfolio as we have in Texas, because if gas prices were to rise back to their 2008 levels, then coal would provide a hedge against that. When gas prices are low, then gas is the right thing to dispatch. So if you put all your eggs in one basket, you run the risk of having not a portfolio, but a situation which doesn't give you any options.
Yeah.
Mr. Rush, I would say in the affirmative, the transition to utilization of gas is a net positive for society and certainly for Colorado. But as Chairman Smitherman said, we do need to keep that diverse portfolio.
Mr. Moore.
I apologize. I'm going to have to not take a position. Our not-for-profit independent status precludes me from choosing between fuels.
So I think the evidence in New England has been that the transition to natural gas has been a beneficial thing for the region, both from an economic and an environmental point of view. I think to Mr. Hibbert's earlier point, it's vital that we make sure that the fuel infrastructure can support that gas generation.
And I would agree as well that given the economic, environmental, and reliability benefits, the transition is a good one.
Mr. Moeller, in your testimony, you expressed some concerns about the impact of the expected coal plant retirements and retrofits on the MISO reserves of electricity generation capacity. When MISO briefed the committee staff, they focused on the winter of 2016. By that time, most of the retirements would have occurred. MISO said there was a, quote, potential shortfall, end of quote, of 11,700 megawatts of generation capacity at that time. And I know that your job is to keep the lights on, and that means considering the worst case scenario. I can appreciate that, but I want to make sure that the subcommittee gets a realistic picture of some of the resource adequacy situation in MISO. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about it, about this potential shortfall. MISO's projection assumed that 3,000 megawatts of new gas capacity would be built over the next 3 to 4 years. That seems to be kind of low. Would you consider that to be a conservative assumption?
That conservative assumption is based on people who have requested to interconnect new gas-fired generation to the MISO transmission system.
As I understand it, MISO's calculation doesn't count any new wind capacity. Is that right?
Wind capacity in our market, should the owner of the wind choose to count it, gets a 12% capacity credit for its participation.
Wind is an intermittent resource, but it's also the single largest source of new generation capacity last year. A calculation that doesn't account for any new wind capacity may be missing an important piece of that puzzle. The MISO analysis also assumes that almost 19,000 megawatts of natural gas generation wouldn't have the fuel to operate in the winter of 2016. That's significantly more than the entire, quote, potential shortfall, end of quote. We're hearing a lot today about the challenge of making sure that the natural gas infrastructure is adequate. Do you have any comments about the adequacy of the shortfall?
Yes, sir. The point I was attempting to illustrate in that conversation was that the majority of the gas-fired generation in the MISO market was constructed around a summer utilization, and they did not purchase firm transportation for their gas. In July and August, there is typically sufficient gas and gas transportation to meet those requirements because it is not coincident with the heating load. Our concern is that as we move towards using that gas in the winter periods with the competition for heat load, it is unclear how much that capacity would be available. So our conversation was, it's clear that 100% of that capacity won't be available. It's probably also true that 0 of that capacity would be available, but at this point in time, as we discussed with the gas pipe suppliers, it's unclear how much of that gas we can count on to be there for us in the wintertime. The New England situation is a harbinger of problems we seek to avoid, and so that conversation was to point out how large the problem might be, frankly, sir, to pique people's interest so that we can get a solution in time.
Thank you, Mr.